Turn your Bibles to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter number 2. And won't be very long tonight. I don't feel really good. Got a couple of things I want to say. If I can get them out, Lord willing. I haven't been using this Bible in a while to study. I used to use it all the time to study. It's a good Bible. Somebody asked me about a good study Bible. This is called the Matthew Henry Study Bible, which I think Matthew Henry, one of the greatest commentators of all time. And he has a lot to say about things. And I was just looking at it this morning, and I decided to use it. And because I left my preaching Bible at the house when I unpacked it the other day. There's a lot of stuff in here. A lot of Matthew Henry's comments, and he's real conservative and real practical and real good. So Exodus chapter 2, verse number 1. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare his son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein. And she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she opened it, she saw the child. Behold, the babe wept, and she had compassion on him. We talked about that word compassion this morning. Compassion, I think a good practical definition of compassion is loving to the place that you suffer or sympathize with someone, and it makes you do something. Okay? So our use of the word love in our day is really, honestly, totally misused in about every category. True love makes you do something. It forces an action on you. And the word compassion, like the Bible said in the Gospels, when Jesus saw the multitudes, he had compassion on them. And one time it says, he said, oh, Jerusalem, I would have gathered you under my wings. And, so you can see the love there. When I read this story, it's a wonderful story. And I've preached on it a number of times, but I'm not preaching tonight on what I normally preach about it. There's one passage in here, but it is a wonderful story. It's a story of Moses. It's a story when God wanted to raise up a deliverer for his children. And there came out a decree at that time that where the Israeli boys were being killed and slaughtered and dealt with. And God, to protect Moses, to keep him alive for 80 years later, what he wanted him to do. His mom put him in this little ark and sent him down the river. And his sister stood afar off and watched him just to see who would get him. Well, of course, it just happened, of course. The liberals would say that Pharaoh's daughter came down and she saw him and picked him up and had compassion on him. And of course, you know the story. She says, I need someone to nurse him, and his sister's just right there and says, well, I know a Jewish woman that would be glad to. Well, she hires his own mother to raise him. Does God not have a sense of humor sometimes? Pharaoh paid for and fed and trained the deliverer that God used to take him out of Egypt. So what looked like a really bad time and looked like a desperate time, and a mother's desperate move, it looked like. Hebrews 11 says they were trusting God the whole time. Right. And they're put in the Hall of Faith chapter in Hebrews 11. So she wasn't just being irresponsible, I don't believe, Brother Mike, at all. I believe she believed that God was going to do something with Moses And he did. But the word that I wanted to show you tonight was a takeoff of this morning's message. I didn't get a chance to finish it. And it says here that she saw him. And when she saw him, she had compassion on him. Now, I know last week that Dr. Richards preached out of Luke 10. But let's turn to Luke 10 again. And I'm just going to simply read it. I knew he was going to preach it the day before. I talked to him Saturday night, and preachers we're pretty, we're a little weird, all of us. And he said to me, "Have you preached on the Good Samaritan lately?" And I said, "No, sir, I haven't." He said, "Well, if the Lord allows me to, it's what I'm preaching on tomorrow." And I said, "That'll be good." I said, "You'll do a lot better job than me anyway. It'll come from a lot better angle, probably." But chapter 10 and verse number 30, the only thing about this Bible is the pages are absolutely. Amen. Luke 10, they're hard to get apart because I hadn't used it a lot. It's a Bible I bought. I use it in my office every now and then to study. I'm going to use it a lot more. It's going to stay on my sofa because I like these commentaries Brother Matthew does in here. Luke 10, just going to read the story, but we're going to really major on just one phrase and not really the story itself. A certain man went down from Jerusalem, verse 30, to Jericho, and he fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So a man is in dire straits here. He's half dead. He needs some help, and this priest comes by, and he walks across the other side. Now, by doing that, he didn't have to deal with it. Verse 32 says, "And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side." So we've got a man in dire straits that is half dead, that is needing attention. If he's half dead, he's on the way to dying. So if he don't get help, he's going to die pretty soon. And we have this priest, and we have the Levite, which represents, I believe, religion and the law. That's what the priest and Levite represent there. And, of course, they can't help somebody in that situation, So they walk across. And the reason they walk across, of course, is by walking across and away from him, you don't have to look at him. See, I was thinking about this, Frank, the other day, or this morning, Brother Joe. One of the best things that ever happened to Ed Strickland was I was raised we were in and out of church, a couple of still small Southern Baptist churches, and for a while we was a member of a little independent Baptist church for about a year, Brother Keller's church, Pines Baptist, when I was probably I was 10 or 11 years old, something like that. And then I started playing church softball at 14 years old with Pickettville Baptist Church, and that's what the Lord used to end up getting me saved and get me in church. So it was a good thing for me, and me and Brother Gil have that in common, I reckon. We both got in church and got saved because of softball. So, but anyway, I was in a little Southern Baptist church there at Pickettville Baptist, so that was a community church where all my friends went. People I went to school with. Then I joined, I got saved, and the pastor of the church there got done wrong. A couple of deacons voted him out, basically. He preached on deacons smoking cigarettes on the front porch. He didn't preach on it. He just said, I wish we'd make a rule around here that we don't smoke on the church steps. And he said our children don't have to walk through cigarette smoke to get out. Well, with these two deacons, that was the end of the party. About 2 months later, he was gone. And so I left too because it was handled bad. It was really bad. It was handled on a Wednesday night, done really wrong. And of course, the preacher handled himself really fantastic. He did a lot better than I would have done. He sat on the front row and never said nothing. At the end of all the rigmarole, they said, they asked him if he had something to say. He just stood and said, "Well, I love this church. I'm pastor of this church right now. And I'm sorry if I did anything to make anyone mad, but I think I've been very fair. And I've done nothing to deserve what you're about to do to me." That's all he said. And he sat back down. Well, they voted him out. Of course, what they did to vote him out was, this is interesting, ain't it? They brought in a bunch of old members, hadn't been there in a year or two, but they could vote back then, you know. So they brought in, and they wanted to vote like 38, 32 or something like that. And the real vote of the church would have probably been 32 to 10, to be honest with you, you know. But anyway, I left the church, and I went to an independent Baptist church for a while, Hartsville Baptist, and I went through some crazy stuff when I was young, I reckon. And one Sunday morning, we showed up at church, and the pastor didn't show up. And we sat around, and the musicians got their stuff ready, and the song leader got the songs ready, and we it was 11 o'clock, and long story made short, he didn't show up. He didn't call nobody, didn't tell nobody nothing. Didn't show up for 2 weeks. Couldn't find him, matter of fact. So anyway, I left that church then pretty quick too, and went over to Trinity. And my first Sunday night there, that I was fixing to join. I'd done visited a couple of Sunday mornings, and I just felt like I needed to join somewhere that wasn't fixing to vote the preacher out, or he wasn't going to disappear. So I knew it was a pretty stable place. So I went there. Long story made short. Pastor stood up Sunday night, and he preached a message on having compassion on people. And he said, if there's one ministry that does that, he said, I think we have two ministries here at Trinity that shows compassion as much as any other ministries. He said, number one, we have a rescue mission downtown. They did. 901 West Bay Street. And it was there for like 30, 40 years. And they had services every night. They fed people every night. They slept 25 or 30 homeless people every night. And he said, I believe that is a ministry of compassion. And then he put a challenge out there. I'd just been called to preach. I'd just been called maybe a month or two to preach, I felt like. And he said, and the bus ministry. And he said, I challenge every preacher here to get involved in the bus ministry for 6 months and then quit if you can. And tell me how it did for you. Well, I went out the next Saturday. I showed up at the bus meeting at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, and I went out with Brother Hank Andrews, and he took me out there and we went visiting on a bus ride. They didn't have a captain. Of course, I didn't know I was being set up, but I was. Brother Holder, the bus director, set all this up with Brother Gray. And I went out visiting with Hank for about 2 or 3 hours, and we got through visiting. And you know, it was a rough area. It was down by the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville. It was on Phoenix Avenue, Liberty Street, 8th Street, 6th Street, Silver Street. Back then, a pretty rough area, and pretty poor people, really poor people. And I saw things I had never seen, to be honest with you. I mean, I hadn't seen that kind of stuff. And Brother Hank Andrews, as a matter of fact, went up and knocked on one door, and a little boy came to the door, and Brother Hank talked to him, gave him some bubble gum, and we talked a little bit, and he talked about him. And I didn't know this, see, but I found that out on the visitation. And he said, we're going to start a bus ride out here pretty soon. We used to have one out here, and we shut it down a year or two ago, but I want to start a bus ride out here again, so if I do in a few weeks, will you come? And the little boy said, yeah. We got ready to leave, Brother Mike, and the little boy said, Brother Hank, he said, yeah, he said, I'm really hungry. I'll never forget this. Brother Hank turned around and said, what'd you say, son? He said, I'm really hungry. Hank said, well, I mean, you had no breakfast or nothing? He said, no, that's what I hadn't ate in 2 days. And he said, where's your mom and dad at? He said, well, Mom left Friday, and Dad is working this weekend, and me and my sister are staying here. And my aunt was supposed to bring some food to us, but she hadn't showed up. And we're both hungry. I've never seen nothing like that. And it broke Brother Hank's heart. He would tell your heart anyway. He said, I'll tell you what to do. You get your sister ready, and And me and Brother Ed's going to take you down to Main Street. We're going to buy you some hamburgers and french fries. And we took him down there and bought him. He bought him enough. He bought him a bag full. He said, here's enough for lunch. And he said, here's enough for supper. And he said, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll bring you some more food.
Amen.
I've never forgotten it. It showed me that we wasn't in Mexico, we wasn't in Europe, we was in Jacksonville, Florida. And a little boy was hungry. And the Lord really, we got back to the church and Brother Hank said, well, I hope you enjoyed visiting with me today. And I said, yes, sir, I did. It was something I've never experienced. And we got ready to go and he said, you fixing to join the church tomorrow, you said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, we need a bus captain. And I said, Brother Hank, I've never done a bus captain. I don't know nothing about it. I said, how do you do it? I said, where's the bus at? He said, well, you meet the bus. He said, I've already got it set up. We rent buses from a contractor. And he said, they'll meet you if you want to do it starting next Sunday. He said, I'll visit with you next Saturday. And we'll get some kids to come, and they'll meet you over on 21st and Liberty Street down by the Gator Bowl. And you can run the route. And the route was about 25 miles from the church. And he said, you can come back, and he says, just do it for a few weeks till I can get somebody. And he showed me everything. He took me out visiting. He rode the bus that Sunday. We had 14 the first Sunday. And he already knew 8 or 10 of them. They had rode the bus before with him. I told that story to tell you that that's one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Amen.
Because it gave me a heart for the bus ministry. And it's why I feel so strong about it. That's why I've made the statement. I'll make it again, and you don't have to agree with it, but you can just be wrong if you want to. I wouldn't be a member of a church that didn't have a bus ministry.
Amen.
I feel that strong. Because who's going to go get those kids?
Right.
When I took those kids home today, Miss Angelina and then we picked up 4 kids, and Miss Angelina, I dropped her off with the 2 girls, and Kevin and his brother, I took them home. And you know, when they got ready to get out of the van, Kevin, he's been coming how long? Probably 10 years? He's probably been coming, how old is Kevin now? 16, 17, I don't know. How old is Kevin? He's 15? He's been coming 10, 11 years, a long time. And he was a little bitty thing when he started. And he got ready to get off the van. He said to me, he said, thank you, Pastor. I said, no, thank you, Kevin, for coming to church, you and your brother. And his brother got off, and he said, thank you, Pastor. And you know, I just, you know, Brother Keith, you've been doing it so many years, too. And we've had so many wonderful things the Lord's done. And it's all because of compassion. I mean, is it tempting sometimes to quit having the bus ministry because everybody else is? Yeah, honestly, I'm not going to lie to anybody sitting here. There's times I think about our struggles financially. I think about our struggles with workers and teachers and all. And sometimes I really honestly, forgive me if you think less of me, but sometimes I think, you know, maybe we don't need to do it for a while. And I think about that sometimes. But when I do that, I always think back to that day in Jacksonville. And I think back to the Austin Reeves and the Cedric Watsons and the Tony Santavanezes and others, Krista Dunhams. I mean, it's really all about compassion. It really is. It's about loving people. I think of all the things that Todd and Cindy through the years have done with our teams, and the trips, and the, I mean, thousands of hours that they've invested in driving and going, and picking up and doing this or that or whatever. But look at the lives that have been changed through that. And when I sat out there at San Diego this week, it was kind of, like I told you, it was kind of a different meeting for me. It was a really good meeting. It was good preaching. Brother Shemish, to me, preached 2 messages as good as I've ever heard him preach. Neither one of them shouting chandelier messages very deep, hard, challenging messages. But I just sat out there, you know, and I told you I preached for the Spanish church last Sunday afternoon, and I walked out front of the church building for a minute to get some fresh air, and they run 7 buses. And they pull the buses up out front, and they take the kids. And, of course, their bus ministry picks up half adults. Half of their bus ministry is adults that doesn't have rides or whatever. But I watched them unload, you know, I watched 4 or 5 of the buses unload. And it's like the Lord said to me, you know, we just got to keep doing that.
Amen.
And we got to get better at it. We got to get as good as we used to be. And we've got to turn the wick up where we need to. And not just for that, but for all of our ministries, for all of them. It's compassion. I mean, you know, the choir that comes every Sunday at 4 o'clock, realize this. When you get out of church and you go out to eat somewhere, or you go get a meal or something, or you go home and eat and you lay down, it's 2 or 3 o'clock. Well, a lot of times they've got to turn right around and come back to church to practice, you know, for an hour before we all get here at 5 o'clock. Well, that's compassion again to me. It's loving people and wanting to do something that will help people. Now, Pharaoh's daughter looked at this baby boy, and she had 2 options. She could have done like the Levi and the priest did here in Luke 10. She really easily, let's face it, she should have, when it's said and done. Because she was an Egyptian, and her father was Pharaoh. Let's get the facts straight here. And her father wanted what done with little Jewish boys? What did he want done with them? He wanted them dead. Okay? I had something neat happen the other day. I might have told this a while back, but I thought of it. I've been pastoring here long enough to have these kind of stories happen. Years ago, someone in our church went through a situation, and I'll be careful. Wouldn't nobody here know except maybe one family. And but anyway, they went through something, and an abortion was even dismissed and talked about and everything. It was a bad time for a while there. And a while back, I ran into a beautiful 17-year-old girl, and she told me, she said, "You were my pastor when I was born." And I haven't seen her in so long, I couldn't remember what she looked like. And she said right to me, she said, "You don't know who I am?" And I said, "I really don't." I said, "Oh, sorry, I'm an old man. I can't remember where I was 30 minutes ago sometimes, honey." She goes, "Well, you were my pastor when I was born." And I thought when I walked out there and got back in my truck, I thought of how many lives have been ended by abortion and murder's been done. And I thought of what we've missed as a country. Can you imagine what we don't know what we've missed, do we? We really don't. But she looked at him, and she had an option. She had 2 options. She could have done what her father's wish was and ended his life. But the Bible says she looked on him and he cried. And I believe the Holy Ghost had him cry, like Billy Kelly said, probably. Hard to not be good to a crying baby sometimes. And she had compassion on him. And that's what made her do what she did. Then she hired a nurse, which was his mother. He raised her, and then 80 years later, he led the children of Israel out. Now look back at this story of Luke 10 here, and look at verse 33. In 31, the Bible says the priest just walked by on the other side. In 32, it says the Levite walked by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan. Now the reason that's kind of amazing is he should have been like she should have been. Because Samaritans were literally, honestly hated by Jews. And Jews hated Samaritans. So bad that normally neither one would go through the other's country. They would go all the way out of their way to stay away, especially, honestly, the Jews, about the Samaritans. They were called and treated as half-breeds. They were hated by almost every country around them. But here's a Samaritan, and if you looked at a priest, you'd have said, well, for God's sakes, he'll have compassion. Well, the Levite had compassion. Oh, if the Samaritan's what you're waiting on, you're in trouble. He's not going to save the Jewish man. But he did. It says, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was. And when he saw him, he did what? He had compassion on him. There's that word again. And when he saw him bleeding and hurt, and he saw him half dead, he had two options again. He could have looked and walked away. But I want to bring up two little points here. I think one reason why he did something was he did walk by on the other side. The reason I told the story about the bus ministry is because it put me in the homes. And it put me in contact with people, honestly, that some of you have never been through. I'm not being critical of this, but most of you have never been in the bus ministry. And you don't know the pain and the things these kids live through. Right. And even if it's not hunger, even if they're fed well, and even if they get a good education, do you know what they hear? Do you know what's done around them? You know, little Mexico behind Ryan's where Kevin and them come, the boys, I said, thank you, Pastor, today. How many times have I been visiting out there on Saturdays, and they got little porches, you know, most of them, and I had literally, Mother Jill, kicked away 40 or 50 beer cans. Literally. Brother Mike, they've been stacked on the porch before. Right. And these kids live in that. And they go to school and they're not given any hope at school. And they're not given any hope by their musicians or by the television. So who's going to reach them? Who's going to make a difference in their life? Well, I mean, you know, it's the family should come to church. That's what the people don't have bus ministers say. It's about the family. So let the kids go to hell then. You say, oh, preacher. Oh, yeah, that's what you're saying. If they ain't got enough character at 18 years old, whatever, to get up and get ready and walk to church, you're not going to worry about it. Really? I don't think that's what Jesus had done. To be honest with you. Years ago, when we started Reformers Unanimous, the guy that came here from Reformers Unanimous that presented the ministry to us, he said right here in this pulpit, Frank, and I remember as clear as that Bible sitting there, what he said. He said, I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus had a church. He'd have a bus ministry. He'd have a Reformers Unanimous. He'd have a jail ministry. He'd have all those things. So when you look at the Gospels, look where he went. And look who he reached. And look who he went after. Not people that can necessarily bring him money. Or bring him prestige. Or bring him things. But people he could reach with the gospel. And I hope 2018, I really hope that this church, you know, back at Christmas, I was really encouraged by the ones that did it. I don't want to call their names. I can't talk about it a lot. They told me not to. But they did a number of things for a number of families. And I, as a pastor, got thank you cards. And I, as a pastor, got phone calls that I really had not a lot to do with. I'm just the pastor. But it encouraged people. And you know, but the chapel said when I first went out there, the very first conference I went to in Lancaster, California, they had a big banner that they had banners all over the church, and right on the right side of the church was a large banner, bigger than that one there. And it said, people don't care. Wait a minute. Hang on a minute now. Help me out, somebody.
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
You got it, Brother Mike. Thank you. Amen. Frank, you should have thought of that.
I couldn't think fast enough.
But that's the truth. And you know what, church? In a day that we live in, I had a lady call me. I sell things, appliances on different things. Facebook, I've cleaned my act up. And you know what? You sent something to Gil Torres. I did? Yeah, you did. Yeah, and I'm bitter about it. Because he said to me, I'm not having nobody preach me that cusses on the internet.
It's on the internet. That's World Wide Web.
He wouldn't have known it if somebody wouldn't have sent it to him. Pray for Brother Todd. Amen. And he loved it. He showed me and said, that looks really good, Brother Ed. And I said, would you please just erase that? But a lady called me and she wanted a washer and dryer, and we was talking a minute, and she says, I'm trying to come over Monday or Tuesday maybe and look at them, and I could just tell there was something bothering her. And she said, I'm having to buy this washer and dryer because my husband, after 25 years, has left me for a 22-year-old woman. He's left me and my 3 children. And I've got a son that's 20, and I've got a daughter that's 18, and a daughter that's 16. The 20-year-old's about to get married. And he didn't just leave me, he took about everything. And you know, I ended up talking to her probably 15 minutes. I told her I was a pastor, and she lives up in Commerce, you know, and she goes to a little Southern Baptist church up there, she said. And I tried to encourage her. When I got ready to hang up from her, she said to me, you know, I don't know if I'll buy a washer and dryer, but I know God meant me to call you today. Because you've acted like you cared more about me than you do selling an appliance.
Amen.
So trust me, I did. 45 years ago, I walked away from the belt business, basically. I made the decision to be a pastor. I don't regret that. That's what I want to do. That's what God called me to do. But I could tell just that little bit, a few minutes of talking to her. And I gave her a book to read. I actually gave her a book to read by Charles Stanley on forgiveness. I said, it'll really help you. It really will. But there's so many people out there hurting. There's so many people out there whose marriages are messed up, and their kids are killing them, and their finances are killing them, and they don't have any answers. And some of them have no hope. I mean, Brother Joe, you said the 35-year-old you think was an overdose? We think the 35-year-old was an overdose. I mean, 35 years old with a whole life ahead of them. But when you don't have hope, when you don't have anybody telling you that God loves you, that you'll be fine, that the Lord's in control, that spend time with Him and you'll be better. So I hope this year, 2018, we do that better. I hope we as a church become even more of a compassionate church. To be honest with you, we used to be more. And I believe that's what the Lord blessed. And I believe that's what He'll bless again. It's just loving people. Caring about people who can't really help you maybe, but you can help them. One of the Potter's House guys this morning said to me after church, I went out and sat out front a minute, and they went downstairs except for one of them. And I was walking out the side, he walked up to me and he shook my hand. He said, Pastor, thank you for coming out to the Potter's House all these years. He said, and I kind of walked off from him and said, thank you, brother. He kind of turned me around by his hand, and his eyes had tears in them. And he said, I got a lot of help here the last month or two. That's what it's about. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be like a hospital, not a social club. It's not what the church can do for you and your family. It's what you and your family can do for the church and others. I didn't think it was about us. I thought it was about others. I thought the church was about others. I thought the worship service was for others. I thought what we do as a church is for others. That's what the Bible teaches. You know, I'm impressed with our young people that have just really hung in there. I was thinking about Chris and Vicki sitting up there. Young couple. And they got their issues. Chris has more than her.
That's true. That's
But you know what? They're so faithful. They never miss unless they're out of town. They do that faithfully. I look on this front row and I look over here and I see, let's just make 2018 the year of compassion. And let's just try to find ways to help others. Like I told you this morning about, San Diego, they remind me of First Baptist of Hammond years ago. My first time I ever went to First Baptist of Hammond was in 1982 to pastor school. And the theme was the church with a heart. And they showed all their ministries and the ways they reach people. I mean, they had truck chapel ministries at truck stops. I mean, every way you could find to reach somebody, they tried. And San Diego, they remind me of that. Abraham Torres, Brother Gill's son, he's fixing to be on staff probably. Brother Scotty Northcutt has resigned. He's going to do something else for a while. And but Abraham went to Preacher Fisher back in the summer and said, "Preacher, what would you think about us getting little Bible clubs together?" He said, "There's 42 parks in San Diego." He said, "What if we went to every one of them and just showed up, had some refreshments, had a 30-minute flannelograph lesson and message?" He said, "Well, if you want to do it and organize it, fine." He said, "I will." And they made it to 27 parks. Huh? And they had over 4,000 kids total that came to it. And 1,000 of them got saved. And they got nothing for it. It cost them money. It cost them time. But look at the kids that got the help. And what was a blessing at the end of it is what the Lord does, I believe. A businessman dressed in a suit walked up to Abraham Torres after it was over one day. And he said, "Who pays for all of this?" Abraham Torres said, "Well, me and him and him and him and a couple of families in our church." And the man handed him a check. Got his name and filled it out and said, "Will this cover what you're doing this summer?" He said, "Yes, sir." I believe if we show the compassion, I believe Jesus will take care of the finances. I believe that. With all my heart, I believe that.
Amen.
With every bit of my heart, I believe that. Let's make this a year of compassion. Let's just try to come up with ways and ideas to help people. When you see that person sitting on that bench, Strickland's 2 weeks ago, I tell one more story and I'll quit. I do it at Strickland's a lot when I go in there. And me and Jimmy was talking, matter of fact. He kind of walked out with me toward my truck. And there was a guy just sitting on the bench right outside the door on this side. Me and Jimmy hugged necks and shook hands. And I turned to walk away, and he was just sitting there with his head down, a man in his 30s, probably. And I walked by him at first, and then I just said, I just turned around and said to him, "How are you doing?" He didn't even answer. Didn't even look up. And I kind of walked back over to him, and I said, "Sir, are you okay?" And he looked up and said, "Well, I don't know. You tell me." I said, "Well, tell me. I'm a pastor." And I sat down on the bench beside him. And he said to me, "Well, my marriage of 18 years is over." He said, "I've lost my job that I had for 15 years. He said, "I'm about to lose everything." I just sat there and talked to him, witnessed to him, said he was saved, prayed with him, had a word of prayer with him. Give him my name and number to call me if I could do anything. What if we started doing that? What if we started seeing those opportunities? What if we just said to somebody, hey, can I give you some good news for the traffic? Hey, how you doing, sir? How you doing? For today, ain't it? Yeah. Just show compassion. There's so many people out there that have so many problems, and they really don't have any solutions or answers, most of them. They really don't, very few of them do. And I think if we become some of those answers, or let the Lord become some of those answers, I think it'll bless our church more. I believe that with all my heart. I mean that. I believe that. She looked at him and said, that's a Jewish baby. They're supposed to be dead. She had compassion on him. The Samaritan looked at the man half dead and said, it's a Jew. They hate me. They hate my country. They hate my race. But he had compassion on him. The reason I gave those two illustrations one more time was compassion overrides everything else. Amen?
Amen.
Compassion makes you look at a thing and go, you know, I think I might try to do something.